Bitcoin is often referred to as digital gold. My buddies in Canada don't give a shit about gold, but I don't know a single person in India that will fade gold. It's like cultural, it's religious, it's everything. Like you get married, it's about gold. So I do find that when you now start to couple gold with this like digital gold element, India's got a lot of people, like I said, that can really appreciate Bitcoin for what it truly is.
Our guest this week is a longtime Bitcoiner going all the way back to 2011, founder of the Indian Bitcoin exchange Unocoin. Sunny Ray is a Canadian Bitcoin entrepreneur whose Bitcoin travels have taken him all over the world and being involved with Bitcoin businesses across the globe. We are talking this week about Bitcoin meetups, the advancements of Bitcoin in India, and the politics of Bitcoin in Canada. Stick around. All right, welcome to another episode of the Block Reward Podcast. This week we are joined by longtime Canadian Bitcoin entrepreneur, Sunny Ray. Sunny, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Exciting times. We have just punctured a new all-time high. Bitcoin just hit 125 US, and looks like it's gearing up for bigger things. You were saying we were talking offline about how you have a long history of starting meetups again once people start to really get excited, and you've just started a meetup again. This is like the starting gun, maybe. What's your take on it?
Oh my goodness. For me, meetups are always a really exciting part of my story, at least, and how I got into Bitcoin. So happy to be picking up the baton there. So for me, the Bitcoin meetup stuff's really started back in maybe around 2011, 2012. I moved out from Toronto to Bangalore for a robotics company that I was working for at the time, and I kind of saw what was happening in Toronto with a lot of the guys doing meetups here. Felt like I was kind of, missing it. And one day I woke up and I was like, wait, I can just start doing meetups here in Bangalore. I'll just, attract like-minded individuals. And at my first meetup, we had like me and I think my wife, that was pretty much it. And just kept doing them week after week. And, eventually like a year later, it ended up being like a ginormous event. 1,000 people at the Sheraton in Bangalore. Kind of repeated that whole thing again in the 2016 to 2018 kind of period in Toronto. So with a bit of a twist and same kind of vibe, So started doing meetups. And I have a bit of a formula I was telling you about it. So I like to wait till we pass kind of like that all-time high from the previous high. And I like doing them not just once a year, once every quarter, but I like doing them once a week. I pick a bar, usually really central. The one we picked this time around is right near Bangalore downtown. And yeah, got to it in 2016 and again, started doing them again and again and again. And eventually, before you knew it, a year and a half later, 1,000 people, this time at the Toronto downtown Sheraton, and flying in guys like Dr. Adam Back and, Tone Vase and all these guys, and had a great time doing it. And now I kind of feel like that same thing is, creeping up on us. This, the excitement, it's still not, I wouldn't say full blown. I'd say people are still asleep at the wheel, but if our meetups were any indication, last week we had like 10 people. This time it was like 15, 20. And I expect next week it'll just keep getting bigger and bigger. I love meetups. For me, that's like, it's fun reading online and geeking out on YouTube and Twitter and things like that. But at the end of the day, there's nothing like meeting like real life Bitcoiners and, hearing their stories.
Yeah, I mean, as a class of 2020, it's hard for me to imagine 2011 Bitcoin meetups. And I hear the stories. You see the videos of like Andreas Antonopoulos, who's like one of the first like really incredible Bitcoin communicators, speaking at conferences where there's literally like 90 seats out of 100 are empty. And there's just so much opportunity for people to learn about Bitcoin. And there has been for so long. And, to your point about meetups, I think another thing that is really great about meetups for people who are listening and maybe are new to Bitcoin is like you get an opportunity to meet real people who understand this stuff, and you can talk to them in person. And it's a very like powerful thing that can help people with their level of comfort with things that they may not necessarily know how to trust if they're just watching it online. So yeah, tons of value there. Obviously, like going back to 2011, maybe just let's backpedal a little bit and tell me a little bit about your Bitcoin story, your Bitcoin origin story.
Yeah, I would love to, Scott. In fact, you just alluded to the Andreas. The thing is, it's almost like a meme now where people talk about that picture where he's sitting and he's presenting to an empty room. I think I was in that room. I think that picture was actually taken in Toronto, an event that Tracy and Anthony and these guys had hosted. And yeah, I know. I remember that like it was yesterday. It's crazy. And then the other thing I was going to say is that I don't know, meetups are kind of special for me because Bitcoiners, I mean, even if you fast forward to today, they tend to be the black sheep, whether it be at like family parties or at work or wherever. And it's hard to find other people that are like orange pill the way we are, right? And so I don't know. I just find like even if you get 5 or 6 Bitcoiners together, like forget 50 or 60 of them, it's like there's like this like energy about it. And I don't know, I absolutely love it. Yeah. So my story, I mean, without, boring your audience too much, I'm an electrical engineer. I spent nearly 8 years in robotics, working for a company called Quanzer. And, prior to that, I had actually run my own financial brokerage. I remember working as an engineer and really feeling like, I remember like when I first graduated from school, you get your first job, you're excited, you're like, okay, finally I'm going to make some money. And I remember, at the end of every month, there being more month than money, right? Like you pay your taxes, you pay your interest on your student loans, you go out with your buddies. And before you know it, there would always be like 5 or 6 extra days where you're like, I just wish that paycheck would come sooner. I remember that feeling is something that I remember quite well. And it was really the feeling that got me to start inquiring about money and like, what is it and where does it come from? And, why is it that most people, kind of revolve their life around money, right? They go to school for 20 years of their lives. They get into divorces, they get into wars. Yet most people, when you ask them, well, what is money? They can't really give you a straight answer, and it was that curiosity that really got me to ask questions, really to myself. I was like, well, how do I get answers to this question? I would ask, people with, CEOs of banks. You'd ask people with all these like financial licenses. And I just remember, I spent about 3 years in running my own financial brokerage, got all my licenses, was, helping families and just couldn't get to the bottom of it. Just simple questions like, what is inflation and where does money come from? And all these things nobody could answer. And so I kind of shelved it, and I left that space feeling more confused than I was at the beginning. And it wasn't until, like I said, 2011, 2012, when I was living out in India, I'd somehow stumbled upon the Bitcoin white paper. I don't even remember exactly how. I think it was probably a lot of these guys back in the day, like Charlie Shrem and Roger Ver and Max Kaiser and all these hardcore guys would talk about it on YouTube. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to read the white paper and just fell down the rabbit hole. And, can't help but feel that Bitcoin is the future of money. So yeah, it's, I think back then we definitely didn't have, the president of the United States talking about Bitcoin and the Black Rocks and all that. It was more just, intellectual curiosity. But, the good old internet, you can always rely on it and get, learn yourself. And so I've been, pretty much full time in the Bitcoin space since around 2012.
Yeah. And it's hard to even imagine like if Bitcoin is $100, Bitcoin $700, like, and today we're talking about it being like $125,000. And, people are still struggling with this same question about like, what is money? What is inflation? How does it work? I think, one of the interesting things is the biggest difference between now and then actually has nothing to do with Bitcoin and way more to do with inflation. Like 2020, I think, uncoincidentally for me, when I got started with this, was because that was when I think money started to noticeably work differently. By the cost of things starting to increase just much faster than ordinary people are used to. And it's like this weird thing with Bitcoin because the price of Bitcoin is still increasing faster than other things too, which is confusing for people. But it's it's an interesting intersection today with, like you said, the president of the United States and the biggest institutional investors talking about Bitcoin at a time where money has been probably more confusing than ever.
Yeah, no, that really resonates. Yeah, the inflation thing is a tricky one, and it's like I always equated to asthma. I don't know if you ever had trouble breathing, but as a kid I had pretty severe asthma, and it's like when you're breathing fine, you're okay with it and everything's normal. But when you've got like when you're coming down with an attack, it's like all you can think of. And I find money's similar, when you've got a lot of it in the bank, it's like, nah, whatever, inflation, no inflation. But when you're struggling financially, it feels like the world's like collapsing in on you. And it's so difficult to even put your finger on it. I mean, I think most people, when they think about inflation, they attribute it to greedy entrepreneurs raising the prices of things. And, most people don't even understand really what's happening, and that it's attributed to money printing and all these things that, Bitcoiners geek out about. But I don't know. Like I said, I can't help but feel that Bitcoin is kind of flipping the script on maybe one of the most important things of our lives. Yeah. Like I said, money's a bit cliche, and, people don't like talking about it and stuff, but it's so important. Like, it's so important. We're spending all day, like all week, all our lives running after it. Like I said, but yet we can't articulate what it is. So yeah, no, I think Bitcoin is very, very exciting. I think the fact that it's, deflationary by design is definitely a feature. And yeah, and happy to kind of, dig into this concept of inflation, if that's of interest.
I'd love to actually, let's go on a right turn there. And I'd love to ask you a little bit about Unocoin, because I'm fascinated by other parts of the world, what's happening with Bitcoin conversation. And India obviously is a massive population. It's a very tech focused part of the world. Maybe, yeah, let's hear a little bit about Unocoin and your experience with Bitcoin in India.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of happened organically. Like I said, I was living out in India in 2011, 2012, and I'd always had this desire as a kid to someday start a business. And it's kind of funny because my dad spent like more than half his life in Canada. Really kind of got out of India at a very young age and built his career here. And yet I kind of did the opposite. I went back to India to start a business. But yeah, it just so happened that I was living in India at the time. And like I said, got obsessed with the idea. I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And what felt natural for me at the time was to just host meetups, was to just get around other people that were just as passionate as I was. And that's what I did. And, through that, I remember we'd host these meetups and we never just did it at the coffee shops. We'd always do it at like the nicest place we could find. So in Bangalore, it happened to be at this hotel called the Leela Palace, which was like a 6-star or something like that hotel, like ridiculously nice. You get pat down before even coming into the place. And then people would come in and yeah, we noticed a disturbing pattern. Here we would be, evangelizing about Bitcoin, yet the number one question we get from everyone is, how do I buy some Bitcoin? Right. And people would literally come in with like duffel bags full of cash sometimes and be like, you guys got some Bitcoin? It didn't take us too long to realize that, hey, okay, well, maybe there's something here, right? Maybe we can build something. And, we didn't start with building a brokerage or an exchange. We tinkered with Bitcoin mining. We built maybe one of India's first Bitcoin mining operations, lost a considerable amount of money. That was around the time we were going from like GPUs to ASICs, right? That was kind of like when ASICs were emerging. And so if you didn't kind of catch the trend at the right time, you get blown away. We did events, large scale events, small scale events. We did physical Bitcoin, and I could name maybe 10 or 12 other experiments that we had run. But the one kind of common thread was, people would always ask us, say, like, hey, like I want to buy some Bitcoin. And we just didn't have a good answer. And so one fine day, myself and my co-founders, Satvik, Harish, and Abhi decided, hey, let's throw up a website. And we did. We threw up, I was holding on to this website called Unocoin for about a year. I was mostly just making blog posts about the whole India Bitcoin movement and recording my journey there. And we thought, hey, look, let's just take this domain, rip down what I've got and rebuild it in the form of like a Coinbase of India. I think that was kind of our initial objective. And yeah, here we are, 12 years later, serving almost 3 million users. And what a journey that's been. What a journey it's been. It's been crazy. In fact, we launched Unocoin at an event that we hosted in December 2013, where we hosted it at the Sheraton in Bangalore. And, our thinking back then was like, this Bitcoin thing is inevitable. It doesn't matter who you are, like you will be touched by this movement, whether you like it or not. And so we were very forthcoming about it. I remember we put ads in the newspaper. We invited, all the entrepreneurs, all the reporters, like all the, professors to regulators even. And believe it or not, we actually had somebody from the central bank show up at our first event that we ever did. I'll never forget this, but right at the beginning of the event, as we were kind of, settling in and people were grabbing some sweets and some food or whatever, someone came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Sonny, somebody from the central bank is here and they want to talk to you." I was like, "Okay, cool, let's go." I walk over to this gentleman and he turns over to me and he's like, "Listen," he's like, "if anyone even mentions that I'm here, publicly or in front of everyone," he's like, "I'm simply going to stand up and leave the room." And so that was my first, encounter with a central banker. I was like, "Oh, okay, sir. Well, thanks for being here. Enjoy the samosas and see you around." And then, oddly enough, about a week after that event, maybe 2 weeks after that event, the central bank put out a notice on their website saying, "Hey, look, this is like a warning. It's all Indians, buyer beware. We believe this, Bitcoin thing is highly risky due to volatility and security and all these other things." And that was kind of like the first, real encounter we had with them. And, that was a scary time, at the time because we didn't know what to make of it. And quite frankly, all the businesses, like the, 3 or whatever Bitcoin businesses at the time, decided to shut shop, like just to close up for a little bit until we could figure out what to do next. And then about a week into that, our lawyer, Nishit Desai and Associates, who are to be credited for a lot of the, kind of victories in India. They're our lawyers. They're amazing. They're like a firm of about 100 or so engineers that became lawyers and very, very technical, very smart. And yeah, and one day they said, "Look, you guys aren't doing anything illegal, and we're gonna essentially call a press conference in our office." And they did, and they said, publicly that, "Hey, look, as per our techno legal analysis, we believe that Bitcoin is not illegal per se." And they couldn't say Bitcoin is legal because no lawyer can claim legality, but they said it's not illegal, which were kind of like lawyer speak for it's all good in the hood. And that one statement literally enabled us to kind of, open up the doors and serve the market. And we did so for, I don't know, I want to say almost 6 years with that warning that had come up on the central bank's website, popping up another 2, maybe 3 times. And then finally leading up to, 2018 when they instructed all the banks, telling them, "Hey, look, they'll shut down bank accounts of all the crypto businesses." And yeah, and that kicked us off, in that 2-year journey to really challenge the central bank and the Supreme Court. And the rest is, history. We won that court case in 2020. Tim Draper invested in us soon thereafter. But yeah, it's been a long road, and I think that story is, important for people to know just because, when you understand what Bitcoin's trying to do and you stop skirting around the edges and, face it for what it is. I mean, it's Bitcoin, right? And Satoshi was pretty clear that he was trying to invent the future of money. And I think, the central bankers in India were acutely aware of that. And so, it's one of the first examples, I think, in the world where, a community of Bitcoiners stood up against the central bank and actually won.
Wild. Yeah, money, like talking about, kind of to come back to what we were chatting about before, the India piece was money is a technology, right? And it's actually the least innovative technology probably in the world, right? Because of the monopoly on the creation of money that the central bankers have. Is like innovation in the world of money is actually a bad thing, and money being bad at what it does is good for the bankers. So yeah, you're somebody who's actually sort of lived on the front lines. And so in the time since that decision, how would you describe like the state of the appetite of Bitcoin in India, and how are people using it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, India, I think it has definitely put itself on the map in the sense that in the last bull run that we had back in 2020, India emerged as perhaps like the second most, I don't know, second most populous country, not populous, but in terms of number of Bitcoiners, adoption, volume. I saw a stat just recently as well that, in terms of the whole world, maybe after the United States, India stands as number two in terms of number of Bitcoiners and whatnot. So a couple of things I wanted to say. So first of all, on the India front, I do think that India is still not like fully awake to the opportunity. And, I hope, people don't find this like insulting, but I do find that, and I'm generalizing here heavily, but I do find Indians tend to be a bit more cautious, if you will. And yet when an opportunity is present and clear, they tend to pounce, like the internet being a prime example, right? The internet didn't start in India, but it sure as hell ended up there. And so I think, I think if you stand back and kind of look at the demographics, like the fact that it's the most populous country in the world, there's more young people in India than anywhere else. You've got a huge portion of the population that's IT savvy. If you look at mobile adoption, if you look at the number of new bank accounts coming online, number of new stock, broker accounts, etc., on and on and on. Oh, if you look at the number of people that have an affinity towards gold, right? I mean, I heard the other day that Indian women own more gold than the United States government, right? So as you couple all these variables together and you start to go, well, maybe, once India does wake up, that there's just going to be this like explosion of activity and interest. And we've seen glimpses of that, like I said, in the last few, bull runs over the last 10, 12 years. When India does wake up, it's hard to keep up with them. But we've also seen, our fair share of challenges. I talked about the central bank. Now, I would say more recently, one of the bigger challenges has been a very onerous tax regime that the country's put into place in the form of, they call it the TDS, and on, right? But I would say that's been one of the bigger downsides of the Bitcoin adoption story. Just to kind of put a bow in it, though, yesterday, the finance minister of India, made an interesting announcement. Although it wasn't about Bitcoin, it was about, Bitcoin's younger brother, stablecoins. She said that, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but essentially that, that the world is moving ahead, like with or without us type of thing. And, you have a choice, either get on board or don't. And the fact that India is a democracy, they're English speaking, they're an ally of the United States, and on and on and on. I truly believe that it's just a matter of time before, India perhaps even takes that number one role as like an adopter of Bitcoin. But we're probably still 2 to 5 years out from that happening. And I'm very, very excited about the India Bitcoin opportunity.
Yeah, one of the things that I kind of wonder about as we think about how the world could be different and continue to change is if an emerging nation like India were to be one of the leaders amongst like the really large and important countries in the world, like which one is going to go first in really adopting Bitcoin? Obviously, like this is true with Bitcoin, with individuals, with companies. The earlier you start, you have an advantage against everyone else who takes longer. And so there is, a big opportunity for the country that has the vision and conviction, I guess, to get on board with what's already happening.
Yeah, no, I really, again, do believe that India, I mean, maybe it's too late for that number one position, right? When you look at what's happening with like MicroStrategy and the US government and, like I said, the BlackRocks of the world. But even I think a number two position wouldn't be so bad. So there's, like I said, the gold thing is really interesting. I think there is this, like, Bitcoin is often referred to as digital gold. Most of my buddies in Canada don't give a shit about gold, unfortunately, but I don't know a single person in India that will fade gold, right? Like it's like cultural, it's religious, it's it's just like it's everything. Like you get married, it's about gold. I mean, it's all, gold is everywhere. And so I do find that when you now start to couple, gold with this like digital gold element, India's got a lot of people, like I said, that can really appreciate Bitcoin for what it truly is. But another perhaps counterintuitive angle that I think again makes Bitcoin very, very interesting for India is this like remittance opportunity. A lot of people don't know, but India is the largest inward remitter in the world. More money comes back to India from people like, let's say, my father sending money back to his mom, my grandparents. That flow equates for more than, hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Yet the fees are very, very high, right? It could be like 5 to 10%. It takes a long time. It could take you a week to get your money. And then if you really think about it, I mean, remittance is really going to people at the bottom of the barrel, right? These are the people that are struggling and they need this money. It's their lifeline. So imagine being able to make that more efficient. I mean, it would have a huge, huge impact on, I think, lots and lots of people in India. And so I do find that you look at that digital gold piece, you look at the remittance piece, and then you look at like the real core strengths of Bitcoin. Like I said, I think it's just a matter of time, and I think it might be this bull run that India puts itself on the map again. But not gonna lie, it's been a tough decade or so. I mean, it feels like we take 2 steps forward and 1 back, but the interest is there, the community, I think the businesses, the high net worth families and the companies, like all of it's there, but I do feel like there needs to be an alignment, on the regulatory front.
Then more recently, you've been doing some work in Canada again, and we did an episode about Bitcoin treasury companies back in August. Maybe let's just chat about that. I'd love to hear your take on what's happening in the treasury space and some of the work you were doing.
Yeah, I stepped away from my role at Matador. I think it was last week, but I had the good fortune of working with the Matador team, for the last, I want to say about 1.5 years. And it was really, David Bailey. Do you know David? Yeah. So David Bailey's an old time friend of mine. He's, done a lot of great things in the space, namely, Bitcoin Conference, Bitcoin Magazine, UTXO. But then I would say, most importantly, orange pilling. Oh, Donald Trump into Bitcoin was one of his tasks. And so in a conversation with Bailey about 1.5 years ago, he really, painted a picture for me that seemed very compelling. And, he described it quite simply. He just said, Sonny, like this Bitcoin treasury thing is really, in his view, it's almost like the Bitcoin exchange opportunity, let's say in 2012 or 2013, reemerging as an almost, I don't know, like an evolved version of it, right? Like running an exchange now for so long, there are definitely some major challenges, right? I talked about taxes being one of them. You got to build your own app. You've got to you got to do marketing. It's expensive to bring people onto your app. Just on and on. There's all these challenges. Yet, everyone and their dog has a Zeroda or like the Robinhood equivalent, app on their phone. And and so it hasn't quite taken off. There's a company called Jet King in India that's gotten out of the gates recently. And so I think this treasury thing is a very, very interesting one. I think there's probably less than 100 or 200 companies that have really decided to march in this direction, but I am very, very bullish on it. The overall trend, I think it's just inevitable. I don't think it's just going to be a handful of companies. I think eventually, we're probably going to start, ticking towards, half of all the companies that are public and even private holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet. One of our investors, Tim Draper, is always going on blast saying, hey, look, if you're a CFO of one of my companies, at least that I've invested in, I need you guys to hold Bitcoin because, last year, the year before, we saw even banks like Silvergate Bank and these like crypto Bitcoin friendly banks shutting down. So I think the writing's on the wall. I think it's still early days. We're probably in like the first inning of it, but I think what Michael Saylor has done is very impressive. And I'm here for it. I've got my popcorn out and taking notes. I'm really excited. What about you? What do you think about the treasury movement?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that every company will hold Bitcoin because it makes sense, and we'll at some point just stop calling them treasury companies and we'll just call them companies. And, it's like nobody talks about companies that use email anymore either. It's just a part of doing business. So, the one thing about the treasury space that I'm super interested in, and if you're following it, I'd love to know your thoughts, that the MicroStrategy, in a strategy has done some really innovative things, in addition to sort of being the first mover. They've created all of these other financial products with Bitcoin as kind of the underlying fuel. And, these are offerings that they released earlier this year. The tickers are like STRK, STRC, and STRF. And they're essentially high yielding loans where investors give Strategy their money. Strategy uses that money to buy Bitcoin and rewards that buyer with a right to buy preferred shares at a certain price. And in the meantime, they get really high yielding dividends, like 10% plus. And so what they're really doing now is creating a market for money to flow into Strategy for people who don't care about Bitcoin at all. These are people who could just care about getting a yield on their money that's higher than they can get from bonds, government bonds, junk bonds. Like it's a real estate, other investment opportunities would have a really hard time paying out a 10% yield on something. But Bitcoin's compound annual growth rate has been somewhere in the 40 or 50%. So basically, Sailor's saying, give me $100, I'll pay you $10 a year. And with your $100, I'm going to buy something that's going up at 40% a year. And we can take that trade all day. I think that this innovation is, the start of really like a black hole where investors who don't necessarily care about commercial real estate, but are looking for that 7 or 8% dividend are now going to have a really tough time ignoring these strategy products when they prove to be able to pay these dividends out over a consistent period of time. And so this is to me, is a really big deal that we are in the very, very early innings of, because people haven't understood that this thing, it works as long as it works. But what's interesting about it is the longer it works, the more money Sailor has to keep buying Bitcoin and perpetuate the cycle of driving the price higher. So he's really created his own funnel for like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's going to be something that I think really shocks people when there's a broader understanding in the market of what they built and what's available now. It's like, there's all kinds of entities, institutional entities, pensions, reinsurers that actually can't buy Bitcoin, but they can buy something like this that just yields 10%. So like all kinds of the profile of who might want to buy this thing is massive, and they can be completely Bitcoin agnostic. Like it doesn't matter to them how it works. As long as it works, then it's going to, I think, suck a lot of capital away from, commercial real estate. Like I said, sort of junk bonds. I mean, I don't know why anybody would buy government debt that's yielding half of this number when it's way riskier, in my opinion. And so we'll see.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Just curious. So it almost feels like there's like this kind of this bifurcation of treasury companies. There's like the Michael Saylor types, right? Where they're just leaning in heavily into this like financial engineering, building products that are very interesting. And then there's like this second cohort of companies that are more, just like regular companies generating cash flow, but then aping into Bitcoin. And there's this kind of dichotomy right now, like where people are going, well, look at MicroStrategy. They barely make any money. And then when the downturn comes, they're not going to be able to service their debt. They're going to have to sell their Bitcoin. So just curious, where do you kind of fall on that spectrum? Like, are you more bullish on kind of like the cash flow generative businesses? Like you said, every business will be a Bitcoin business. Or are you very bullish on kind of these Michael Saylor types that are really leaning in and doing these like kind of creative things that, no one's ever even thought of?
Yeah, good question. I mean, not financial advice. This is just my opinion watching the space. I think that there's really only one company that is going to be able to innovate and do what Strategy is doing. So that is a play entirely on its own. And so you can have your own opinion about how well or not that will work. Max Kaiser made a tweet about this in the summer as a reference to Game of Thrones to say that like Michael Saylor's basically built the Iron Bank. And if you watch Game of Thrones, like I think this is what, in the future, like it's, the numbers are staggering. Like just with the Bitcoin they have right now at 125,000, I think their Bitcoin is worth 76 billion. At 200,000, it's worth 126 billion. Like, so they're just, they're so far in front of anyone else that they're going to have the ability to do things that nobody else can do. Nobody else would be able to offer a product like this 10% thing because they'd have to be confident enough that they could have the inflow to guarantee that they could be protected to pay the outflow. So I think that that's a one-time thing. I think it's very interesting. My personal opinion is Strategy will end up being the most valuable company in the world by the end of the decade. And then, so then I would say there's maybe two categories of other companies in the treasury space. There's companies that are just kind of buying Bitcoin and fiddling around with the metrics of like their Bitcoin per share. There seems to be a number of companies that are competing with each other on that basis. For me personally, those would all be a pass. I think like that's a very, you're really getting into the same things that make and don't make cryptocurrency work, where you're now not subject to rules. The point of owning Bitcoin is that the rules don't change and everybody can agree on the same rules. And like that's something that makes Bitcoin valuable. I think if you start trying to gamble on companies that are actually doing the opposite, that's gambling again. And then, the companies that are holding Bitcoin and have a real enterprise, I think those are going to be really successful companies. And I would say, if you were looking at, let's say Tesla versus Ford Motor, Tesla does hold Bitcoin and Ford Motor doesn't. I think that the companies that are holding Bitcoin earlier are going to be winners against those that aren't. So that would be kind of my broad strokes opinion of the market.
Scott, I know we're supposed to be interviewing me, but I just got to ask, I saw you release an interview with the Vancouver mayor, was it yesterday?
Yeah, Ken Sim.
I got to ask you, so any unique takes on that development? I mean, I heard about that like a month or two ago and I was quite excited because, it's been crickets, right? In terms of like governmental people in Canada. I mean, we heard Pierre pipe up about it, a couple of years ago, but no one's really talking about Bitcoin, which is like super odd to me. But the fact that this mayor guy is putting his neck out there and, going on blast it makes me feel good, as a Canadian. But I just, what was kind of the takeaway from your interview?
Yeah, I mean, and it's Vancouver. Like, it's not like he's the mayor of a small town, in northern Saskatchewan. Like, this is like one of our flagship cities in Canada. I'm a huge fan of Ken, and I appreciate he's trying to do something very difficult because also sort of the political climate in Vancouver is very left leaning, and he and I have talked about this in the interview. Like, it's unfortunate that politicians sort of politicize Bitcoin as to try to make it an attack vector for any politicians that might want to come out pro Bitcoin. You're like risking that, people who know very little about it they could hold that against you. And I think that's happened in Vancouver. Ken's party lost an important by-election in April. And that's part of the reason why the progress has been a little bit slower. And it's because, I think he exposed himself to, it's a polarizing topic for people who don't understand that Bitcoin is apolitical and it's solving a problem that basically affects everyone. So we should all be on board, both sides of any aisle. Yeah, he really understands Bitcoin. He's an accountant by trade and a legitimate Bitcoiner. And Vancouver, as he's explained, Vancouver has the same problem that any individual person who's saving in Bitcoin has or has solved, that Vancouver has the $3 billion in cash that they're stewards of for the people of Vancouver. And the value of that money is being eroded through inflation. And they are actually quite limited in what they can do to protect themselves from that. They can't even invest in an index fund of they're limited to investments that actually by design underperform the rate of currency debasement. And so it's a very critical thing that he's trying to solve. And taking a lot of heat for it. So yeah, I admire his, like, the guy's got a lot of backbone. He's doing something that he thinks is important in the face of, being criticized by people who either don't understand it. And one of the things that he said that was really interesting was some of his opponents who are using this as a weapon against him actually privately own Bitcoin. And which is like, for me, it's such an example of like the problem with our political systems in general aren't truly designed to put the people first. They're designed so that, the incentive mechanisms are for people who have short political career terms to try and get that continually extended by doing whatever they can to get voted in again. Like, this is what regardless of how people start a political career, how the system works is that you're on a hamster wheel of trying to get reelected, right? If you want to be staying in the game. So yeah, they're working towards the goal of being able to like accept Bitcoin, for payments like property tax payments, trying to figure out. But right now they're not even allowed to do that. And it's interesting. You see some of these like bureaucratic red tape. Like the city can accept all kinds of gifts, donations. They can accept art, but they can't accept Bitcoin. And when Ken made the announcement about wanting to make Vancouver a Bitcoin friendly city, the Sim family pledged a $10,000 Bitcoin donation. And that was in December of 2024. And the city still doesn't have a way to accept that donation almost a year later. Like they just actually don't have a policy or a way to accept a Bitcoin donation. So he hasn't even been able to make it. And so, that was another one of his, like, he's said more than once that he vastly underestimated the red tape and how hard it would be to sort of move this stuff forward. And so I'm hoping that he gets some like duration in his term as Vancouver mayor. And, because Vancouver is also like one of the most pro Bitcoin cities in the world already. Like there's 200 plus merchants in Vancouver that accept Bitcoin. Vancouver Bitcoin meetup is like really thriving, several hundred people per meet. So it's a really, it's a hub of Bitcoin in North America for sure. So I think like it would be so cool and fitting if they were able to get this over the line and have it be somewhere that embraced it. It's because it's like we're talking about with India, right? The first city that really also embraces Bitcoin will have that same advantage against other cities. And to me, the big advantage is they won't be broke. And, you look at like Toronto and, like as property transfer tax revenue declines, the cities only have so many different levers that they can fiddle with to keep the city solvent. And there's going to be massive pressure. And you look at, across America, Chicago, lots of cities are facing challenges with, perpetual funding and the problem of having to store the money they do have in a currency that's accelerating and how it's losing value is like a really unsolvable problem. So I wish, it's like, I wish more executives were paying attention to Saylor, and I wish more mayors were paying attention to Ken Sim.
Yeah, we touched on Pierre. I don't know if you remember he showed up at Tahini's, I think it was, here in GTA, and did an interview and spoke very positively about Bitcoin a couple of years ago. You've got and then at the city level, you've got the mayor of Vancouver. And then at the provincial level, right? I'm proud to say I was, born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta. And we've got, what's her name? Danielle Smith. I was at an event in Calgary not too long ago where I heard that she made a commitment to buying, I think, $10 million worth of Bitcoin. Did you hear about that?
I didn't hear about that one, but I do know from behind the scenes, some of our other guests from Alberta Bitcoiners who've been on the show, they're in close communication with her. And I think that Alberta could be a province that is first to make a really pro-Bitcoin announcement. Yeah,
I mean, if anything, I think Trump taught us that embracing Bitcoin can work favorably as well, right? So it does pain me to see these politicians kind of on the fence, and they're trying to essentially play politics, right? It's like, oh, if it works in my favor, I'll do. But it's like, it's just the writing's on the wall. It's just a matter of getting out there and being a bit more, I think, just forthcoming about it. And I don't know. I mean, all this the kind of back and forth bugs me. But I guess the good news about that is that if our country is still struggling with all of this, it probably means that there's a tremendous amount of upside still left to be had, right? Like, so stack sats while you can.
Yeah. You still have the opportunity to front run every major city in Canada if you're listening, and just about every major city everywhere. So Sonny, this has been a lot of fun. For our listeners, maybe you want to learn a little bit more about you. I know you've got your own podcast. You've got a lot of different things going on. Like where can we send listeners who want to learn more or follow you?
Yeah, my Twitter is just sunnyraycom, like COM. So I have a website, sunnyray.com as well. I think maybe those two places are probably the best if people want to, tap into what I'm working on. But I'm doing meetups again. So anyone out there who live in Toronto or GTA, every Saturday at the Firkin on Bay, we are hosting meetups. And this last one was electric. We had the Beaver Bitcoin guys come out. They're now one of our sponsors. And I don't know, to me, it just feels like, 2011, 2012 all over again. You don't have like a bazillion meetups, going on. And so leaning into that. So anyone who hears this, if you want to come and hang out with us, come out. Actually next week, we're going to be covering everyone's first beverage. So there you go. I'm also speaking at the Canadian Bitcoin conference. Really happy to be supporting Daniel. I love what those guys are doing. I think, I'm really excited to be seeing all the Bitcoiners come out there. Yeah, I'm working on a book called $1 Million Bitcoin Blueprint. I think this is the first time I'm actually saying that out loud on a public space. But I'm working on a book that it's really a book that I wrote with the hopes of giving it to myself from 10 years ago. So I was like, well, what are all the things I've butt my head up against over the last 10, 12 years in building Bitcoin businesses that I would just wish I knew way back then? And so yeah, just having fun, Scott. Working with companies like Block Wars. Really excited about being able to help you guys, and I'm just like I said, I'm just having fun with all of it.
Very cool.
Yep.
Yeah, this episode will air just a few days before Canadian Bitcoin Conference, which I'll be at too. So I'll look forward to seeing you there, Sonny. And thanks again for coming on. And if you're listening and you made it all the way to the end of the episode, I want to thank you as well for tuning in, and hope to see you next week.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Block Reward. We're trying to do something different here, creating accessible conversations meant for people who aren't obsessed with Bitcoin. If you found this episode informative and engaging, hit that subscribe button to make sure you stay updated with future episodes. Your feedback matters. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to share your reviews and help us with our goal of creating Bitcoin content that is simple and easy to understand. Bitcoin has an important role to play in the future of finance. It will change the way we save, spend, and invest. Discover why Bitcoin offers a game-changing opportunity for forward-thinking employers by visiting blockrewards.ca. Block Rewards' mission is helping Canadian employers implement strategies for integrating Bitcoin into compensation and benefits, supercharge your recruitment and retention strategies, and help your team members plan for the rising cost of living by rewarding their work with the hardest money ever invented. Big shout out to Podigy, our production team that makes all this possible, and BMX Escape for producing our music. Bitcoin is an expansive and dense topic many people walk away from early. To Bitcoin enthusiasts looking for that podcast they can share with friends, family, and colleagues, one they'll actually listen to, we hope that is us. The content of these conversations is meant to be provided for information purposes only. Nothing here is investment advice. Bitcoin is a big topic. Be sure to do your own research before making any personal financial decisions. Thanks for listening.